I too am going to cover 3 separate processes that you need in order to get Medicare to pay for services, and I'm going to do it really fast, so you may have some questions. In order to get Medicare to pay you, and I'm going to use that phrase, you need 3 things. You need a code, you need a payment level, and you need coverage. If you have 2 of these, you do not pass go, you will not get any money from Medicare. You need all 3, and they are 3 separate processes. Coding is the language that CMS and private payers and providers use to basically define what it is. Without a code, they're not paid for. With numerous types of coding, depend on where the procedure is performed or and the type of product. That's why they want a code. Coding is not a political process. It's based on data and the support of the medical community. And in fact, most of the coding process is not even within the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services' hands. It's a decision that was made a long time ago, and I think many people would probably revisit that decision now, but it's out of their hands. So while you're working on a code, start working on a payment level. And this is where CMS will provide a payment level even if the service is not yet covered. But they have to know about the service. They have to know what's going on. And depending on the type of device or the service, Medicare will try to fit it into a specific grouping of what they think are similar or like devices or similar or like services. This is where it's really important to start educating CMS on what you're doing, because if CMS thinks you're like something that you're not, you may well end up in a group that you don't belong in. We had a client where CMS wanted to be helpful, actually wanted to put them in a payment group before the coverage. They had a code. Didn't mean they would get paid for the service. But they wanted to put them in what they thought they were like, and they thought they were like the Gamma knife. And we had to go in and educate CMS that the service and the device was not like the Gamma knife at all. And it took some convincing, but that's why it's important to go in and meet with CMS staff. And there are 2 kinds of CMS staff. There's the career staff, who really are trying to do a good job and trying to both not overpay or underpay. And what you need to do to meet with them is have a cost analysis of what you think your service will actually cost to be delivered, or what the device will cost, what the capital outlay, et cetera. And then by meeting with the CMS staff, you can usually judge where they think you belong, and then you can start to react to them and give them better information. It's all about educating CMS staff. The second staff is the political staff, and sometimes you need to see them and sometimes you don't. Often we recommend that people do go see them. Medicare has a series of annual Medicare payment rules, and they create the rule and then they will adjust it. So what happens is if you can go in and talk to them before they do their annual payment rule and get yourself included, then they will propose a rule. And usually, and I've never had a client that didn't have to go in and have some kind of future conversation with them on some aspect of it. But you go in, you talk to them first before the proposed rule, go in and talk to them after the rule is proposed. And that's after the rule is proposed, you can also, is probably the time to meet with the political appointees so that they know what the issues are, because they will have to sign off on the final rule. Payment levels are not permanent. And this is hard for folks to understand sometimes. Once they set a payment rule, as I said, they have an annual rule and they'll adjust the payment after they see claims data. We recently had a client that there was 1 claim came in the year, just 1. And it was higher than the Medicare reimbursement level that had been set by CMS. And this is really important to understand. So we went to them for the next rule and said, you have 1 claim, and the claim is higher. And they said, yes, we do, but it's only 1 claim. And our response back was, but you said you only want to use claim data to set the payment once there's claim data. So they basically split the baby, gave us an increase, but not the full increase. It could also work another way. They like to use 2 years worth of claim data. So once claims data start to come in, if there's 2 years worth, they'll look at the full 2 years. And that's hard to argue with them when you have a lot of data. When there's a little data, you can go in and start to argue with them about the pros and cons of the different claims. But it's important for them to understand where you think you should be. If they set a payment level, let's say it's $10,000, and claims data comes in, it's really $5,000, the next time around they're going to say to you, we want to cut this down. Why shouldn't we? And the reverse can happen, as I explained. You can get something that comes in, and they may not go the full way up, but they will try to adjust. Now I'm going to talk about coverage. And I'm not going to go into detail about the coverage process because Congress just passed legislation to make it more transparent. Not easier, but more transparent. There are 2 ways to obtain coverage. One is a national coverage decision that's done by CMS in Baltimore. And the reason a lot of people don't go for a national coverage decision is because if you get a negative decision, it's really hard to come back from it. It's just harder. The other way is through local coverage decisions. There are 6 or 7 entities known as MACs, Medicare contractors, and in order to do this, you have to go to each single MAC. And some people try to start with those that cover more territory. Some start with the smaller ones. Once you get one to say yes, it's usually easier to get more to say yes. The coverage decision is meant to be solely based on clinical data, and their interpretation of your data is sometimes interesting. It's always helpful if you have a way in to talk to some of their medical directors. And it's it has been a bit of a black box of not understanding completely what they're thinking. The legislation that was just passed, as I said, was supposed to make it more transparent. It has set out some very specific time frames for appealing and information that needs to go along with an appeal and what they have to provide back. CMS is in the process of developing regs and implementing that. And as I said, you go MAC by MAC by MAC. Now, some of the MACs do talk to each other, and the purpose of the new legislation also was to encourage them to be more similar. They don't have to cover everything that their neighbor does, but that creates uneven coverage, and a number of members of Congress have been concerned about that. So this legislation was to nudge them along. But let me give you an example. I have a client, not in focused ultrasound. It's a service that's been covered for a very long time. 4 MACs came out on the same day with the same exact coverage policy, which frankly was stupid and reversed time. As one person said, it put us back to the Civil War. And we went to CMS to say, hey, 4 MACs came out with the same coverage on the same day, kind of a de facto national coverage decision. Can't you help us? Because you know this is not right. And CMS said, if they make a coverage decision, they make a coverage decision. Now, they ultimately did help us, but it really took a lot to get them to dig down and figure out how to help us. And they could not require the MACs to take the bad policy off their website until the MACs individually just came to the conclusion that the data they had used was not really valid clinical data. So with that, I will take your questions if you have any.
I want to point out to everybody that it's very, very important to make sure that your users are billing correctly. We have, with focused ultrasound for prostate ablation, it's a device-intensive code, the C code. So it carries a device-intensive code that you have to fill out with it. It has to represent a certain percentage of the total amount if you're going to get paid properly. We have some facilities that just put $1 in order to check the box. And what that does is it screws it for everybody for a long time. So billing correctly is almost as important as billing at all.
And to add to that, one of the things that we've discovered is that for some facilities who are going from research to really doing a rollout for commercial marketing, sometimes the folks who make the decisions about what the final charge is going to be don't always get the switch from research to commercial. And it's important that they understand the process as well, and that they can actually impact severely or quite positively, depending on how they go, what Medicare does. Thank you.